What's poppin', y'all? We are back at it with Cartel Wives Chapter 4. I am your host, Shy Ill. Thank you for being here. If you have yet to hit the subscribe button, please do. Hit the like button and the bell notification, and let's keep this channel moving forward. Last week we did Chapter 3, and that was basically discussing Val's upbringing, how she came up in the game, how she went from this kid that was, had a police officer for a father, a very strict mother, went to private school, but found her way into the game one way or the other, and she loved it. You know what I'm saying? And not only did she love it, she was good at it, had the ice in the veins for it. You know what I'm saying? Chapter 3 was all about Val, so I'm assuming Chapter 4 is all about Viviana. If you're looking to purchase Cartel Wives in any of its forms, there's an Amazon link in the description. Let's get it. Cartel Wives Chapter 4.
Mia. My mom was born in Brazil, while my dad's family came from Mexico. My parents got married when my mom was just a teenager, and I was born not long after that, in 1980. When I was a baby, my biological father was a drummer in a popular band. He wasn't the best provider, so my mom had to take on a lot of responsibility when he went on tour, which was a lot. She'd have 2 or 3 jobs at once, and she'd leave me with her mother or sister when she was at work. Things weren't great with my grandmother and aunt, though, and I just cried for my mom all day. Then my mom and my grandmother started fighting all the time. Pretty soon, Mom couldn't take it anymore, and she became estranged from her parents. I can't imagine how lonely she felt, all of 20 years old with a baby, a husband who was never there, and only herself to depend on. Then she split up with my biological father when I was 1, and she was really alone. Thank God she met my dad when she did. I don't remember it, I was just a toddler, but my dad helped give us stability, even though times were hard and our life wasn't great.
It seems as the flip side to Val's story, at least up to when Viv was 1 year old, she had an unstable come up. Val's seemed a bit more stable. Though her mother was strict and it caused friction, the all-around lifestyle was probably a little bit more stable than what Viv had in her first year.
We were living in the slums on 26th Street in Little Village. Little Village is just a few blocks southwest of Pilsen, where Olivia is from, and it's known as the Mexico of the Midwest because it's almost entirely Mexican-American. When you drive down 26th Street, the neighborhood's main drag, you see taquerias, auto body shops, supermercados, and a big sign that says, "Welcome to Little Village" in Spanish. Every September, thousands of people flock there for the Mexican Independence Day Parade, which is even bigger than Chicago's St. Patrick's Day Parade. In fact, next to LA, Chicago has the largest Mexican-American population in the United States, so there are always tons of people there. But even with all that business and all that pride, 26th Street was a real dump when I was a kid. The life we had wasn't great. My dad is 4 years younger than my mom, so he was away at college and earning his degree while she was at home and working.
Nah, I believe he was at college. That's what they told us when our parents and uncles and family friends and cousins were in jail. They was in college.
With only 1 paycheck, we couldn't even afford the rent. Our landlord would knock on the door demanding a check, and my poor mom would hide from him with me. Of course, the landlord would come back the next day, but she'd just hide again. My dad was great at baseball, and he was going to try to become a professional. His coach said, "Just do it. You're going to make it. Get into the minors, stay on, and I promise you, you'll make it all the way to the majors." But he gave that all up for me. He said to his coach, "I have a family to raise." And that was that. He married my mom, got his associate's degree, and adopted me when I was in the 3rd grade. I'd see my biological dad every now and then, but he was just this guy that I would hang out with once in a while. There was no heaviness to it like, "Oh my God, now I have to see my father." I didn't feel like I was missing anything because his mom and dad had become second parents to me, and I had my mom and dad at home. I never had to worry if I was loved. When my parents got married, we moved into my dad's parents' 3-bedroom bungalow. It was close by, still in Little Village, but a little south in the 40s. When you moved up in numbers, things got nicer, so the 40s were a step up from the 20s, but not by much. The house was maybe 1,000 square feet, and it was so cramped. We had 10 people living there at once, and there was only one bathroom. One bathroom for 10 people. God bless my grandmother, though. She tried to make things as neat as possible, and
That's what grandmothers do. The good ones. Because don't get it twisted. Just like there's bad moms and bad dads, there's bad grandmas out there too. And granddaddies that suck too.
And that house was spotless. It always smelled like pine sol and her perfume. And in the corner of each room, she had a little cabinet that held her beloved knickknacks and every photo anyone had ever given her.
Leave the figuras alone. Get out of the chinero. Leave that shit alone.
Outside on the streets, things weren't half that orderly. There were gang emblems, graffiti, and murals on every garage door and corner building. People refused to become immune to the mess, like they had on 26th Street, so they'd buy white paint to cover them all up. But no matter how much our neighbors tried keeping up the neighborhood, it never stopped the gangbangers from writing on the walls the next day. I knew an old Mexican man who was so worried that one of them would see a rival's graffiti on his house, then do a drive-by, that he used his hard-earned paycheck to buy paint every single week. Believe it or not, though, when I was that young, it didn't affect me. I was more concerned with how uncomfortable things were in our house than outside of it. I think people stereotype low-income minority communities like Little Village as being bad neighborhoods, where terrible things happen right out in the open and you're in danger all the time. I didn't feel that way. When I was little, I didn't witness anyone shooting up or sniffing lines of coke on the street corners. There weren't any crackheads stumbling down the street. You just didn't see those things out in the open.
Sometimes you're just a kid and you're not looking either. You're seeing things that you don't understand. You don't even realize you don't understand it. Some of us, we see everything. We understand everything. We get it. Some adults, not just kids, some adults are oblivious to what's going on. How many times is there somebody that you know on the street and you could be walking towards them saying their name and they don't even notice you until you right up on them? You know, people are oblivious, man. Adults are oblivious, so imagine the mind of a child trying to figure these things out.
I wasn't naive enough to believe that people didn't do drugs, but it just seemed like there was order. My father told me early on that there were rules and laws called street codes. He said, if a gang member's caught doing hardcore drugs, he'll get beaten up by other gang members. It's called a violation. Sure, you could see the gang members and dealers from a mile away because of their flashy cars and their gold jewelry, but they still had rules, so to speak. Just before I turned 10, my dad started going to the police academy. If there was anyone who was meant to be a cop, it was him. You know when a police officer walks into a room, you can just see their whole aura? That was my dad. My mom had been working for years in the transportation business, and living with my grandparents had allowed them to save some money. My mom was pregnant with my sister, and the thought of having one more person cramped into that house was terrible. It was high time to move. I'd been going to a private school on 69th Street on the south side, and my parents had been looking around there.
They still was able to get into a private school. She was still in a private school. Same as Val.
For a house for years. Finally, they found something they could afford, and we packed up our things and moved. The neighborhood, West Lawn, was only 5 miles away from my grandparents' place in Little Village, but it seemed like a different world. This is wonderful, I thought. This is where people with real jobs live. West Lawn was populated by city workers and their families, so it was solidly working class, but everybody wanted to create a better life for their families. And they did. It was basically little kid heaven. You could ride your bike and be outside all day long, like you were in a small town rather than the city. Our neighbors became our good friends, and we looked forward to block parties every summer. Everyone would sit on their front porches and talk to each other while the kids played games on the sidewalk. All my little neighbor friends went to the same Catholic school, and our parents were all living the same life, trying to make the same dreams come true, through honest means. Sure, the bad neighborhoods were just a few miles away, where my own grandparents still lived, and where we visited every weekend, but we felt like we were far from that. Unlike Olivia, I never had to learn to navigate the divisions within that type of neighborhood.
Olivia's Val, y'all. Don't forget.
Olivia knew the dynamics of gangs and drugs and how to avoid crossfire by never driving down certain streets.
She's a pro.
I didn't have to do that. By the time I moved, I was above the fray. Where Olivia knew boundaries, I just saw streets. Because my dad was a cop, though, I'd hear stories. Chicago was sort of a war zone in the early 1990s, and you'd constantly hear about innocent people losing their lives because of violence. When Dad left the house every day, sometimes in the morning and sometimes at night, depending on what hours he'd been assigned, I'd feel a pit in my stomach. Every now and then I'd see on the news about a cop getting shot, and I'd think, oh God, that could have been my sweet dad. If he was on the night shift, Mom would sleep maybe 3 hours all night. This was before cell phones were popular, so when he was on the streets, he couldn't call us. We'd just have to wait for him to get back to his desk or show up at the front door when he got off duty. Then he joined a special unit and traded in his blue uniform for street clothes, and the danger he faced every day really started to hit home. One Sunday night when I was in middle school, my family went out to dinner at one of the nicer Mexican restaurants in Little Village. They had a mariachi band playing and we were all sitting around the table, my little sister on a booster seat and my baby brother in his high chair. Dad loved mariachi bands. We all did. And we were just happily sitting there listening to them and trying to pick out what to order. Suddenly, I saw my dad's face change from completely sunny and happy to white, like he'd just seen a ghost. "What is it, Dad?" I asked.
Did the job meet them at their family outing? Did he see somebody that he'd rather not be seeing him with his family?
"Nothing. Just order." He was trying to play it cool, but his face said it all. He was scared out of his fucking mind. I was facing him and I turned around and saw a crowd of gang members getting situated at a large table. They were glaring at my dad. "Turn around. Don't look their way. I need to go make a call." He pushed his chair back and got up. We just sat there looking at each other. Probably 5 minutes went by, and then, finally, my mom broke the ice. Under her breath, she whispered, "He put a few of those guys away. And I think he just got out." I wanted to get up and run, but I forced myself to stay seated. The gangbangers kept looking at our table. Then one of them would stand up and go outside. He'd return, then another one would get up. Every time they did, their chairs would scrape against the floor, making this loud sound.
The sound effects. Shout out to the voiceover artist. The sound effects is crazy.
And I swear to God, the mariachi guys would start to sing louder like they were nervous too. Finally, my dad returned, but he had a uniformed cop in tow. "Let's go," he said. I stood up and lifted my baby brother out of his high chair, and my dad led us out as fast as he could. As we marched by, all the gang members stood up in unison. That was the last time we ever went to that restaurant.
Damn, wasn't the restaurant's fault either.
We never saw those kinds of people in West Lawn, at least not for many years. At some point when I was in high school, the gangs started to migrate to the neighborhood, just a few people here and there at first, then crowds of them. You'd see them driving around in their jacked-up Chevys with rims, blaring music so loud it trembled through the streets. They wore their colors and their hats tilted to one side to represent whichever gang they belonged to, even though someone could have shot them with just one look at their colors. Maybe they're proud of who they are, I wondered, and then I realized that it was more than that. They just weren't afraid. Most of them had teardrops tattooed on their faces, showing everybody how many people they'd killed. Every single time I saw them, I hated them. These guys were completely disgusting. They would yell out obscene words to my girlfriends and me while we walked to and from school. At first, we just ignored them. Then eventually, we started yelling back. "Leave us the fuck alone!" They'd answer, "You
shut up, bitch!"
Stuck-up bitches. Other than yelling, What was I really going to do? Nothing, that's what. My dad was a police officer putting guys like that away, and our home was safe and normal. Mom and Dad made sure of it. I went to a nice private school right down the road and had had the same best friend since kindergarten. I made good grades and became a cheerleader. I did my homework on the kitchen table. I went to Catholic church on Sunday with my grandma, and like every kid, pretended I was sick one Sunday a month so I could skip it. Other than that, I was as good a daughter as you could ever wish for, and I did it because it was expected of me. Succeeding and making a good life was what people in my neighborhood did. And if I slacked off, I wouldn't be letting just my parents down, but my little brother and sister as well. My mom had always taken her career seriously, and by the time I was in high school, her intelligence and drive had helped her to reach the top. She'd done it without a college education, too. She was happy with what she did, really happy. And after living with my grandparents cramped in a tiny house for so long, she deserved it. Find something you love and work at it, she'd always say to me, and I admired her for it. She put in long hours and traveled all across the Midwest, and with my dad working nights a lot, there was really no one to take care of the house and my little brother and sister. Except me. My little brother was just a baby then, and I spent every day after school and all summer babysitting him. If I ever wanted to go out on a weekend, I would do all my chores Monday through Friday. There weren't even chores, it was deep cleaning. Then I'd start cooking, so by the time my mom got home at 7:30 or 8, we would have dinner together as a family. That's what Mom wanted, so it's what she got. My responsibilities were never ending, but today, I'm grateful I had them. I learned the importance of taking care of your family, and while they might have sucked at the time, they served me well in the long run. Was I perfect then? Maybe I tried to be, but in the end, who really is? My biggest mistake came when I started dating in high school. During my sophomore year, I met a guy named Mark Jones. He was 3 years older than me, and his dream in life was to be a cop. Of course, I grew up with police officers, and I worshiped my dad. I knew how hard they all worked, sometimes 2 or 3 side jobs to be able to afford Chicago's sky-high taxes. I liked what those guys stood for, so I was drawn to Mark right away. Soon, I was falling for him in that high school way, when you think you've got everything figured out, even though you're only 15. This is exactly the kind of person I should be with, I thought. You grow up with this life, you stick with it. I dated him for 3 years, through his time in the academy and during his first year as a cadet. We broke up when I was 18, and I'm so glad I did. He was arrogant, and he was a cheater. He thought he was God's gift to the world, and after a few years, I really started to see him for who he was.
Damn, it took you a few years to see that.
I knew he wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be with, and thank God I figured that out because he ended up being a criminal as well as an asshole. In 2012, Mark was sentenced to 2 months in jail after one of the biggest corruption scandals in the Chicago police force's history.
2 months? Biggest scandal in police history? Chicago police history? 2 months. Must be nice.
Over the course of his career, he assisted his colleagues in stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from suspected drug dealers.
I'm taking the chance at hundreds of thousands of dollars too. If it's only gonna give me 2 months. If I could steal with impunity hundreds of thousands of dollars for years and get 2 months, that sounds like that's a great investment, great trade right there. I invest 2 months, I come up. Must be nice.
During traffic stops and unlawful searches of their homes. From all the good things cops do, like protecting the city and your family, you'd think they'd all be loyal and honest.
Nope.
9 times out of 10, I think they are. Look at my dad. But there are bad apples in the bunch, like my ex. It would take getting to know my future husband and seeing what he went through with the police to show me how true that is.
There it is, Chapter 4, Cartel Wives. I assumed correctly at the beginning of this episode, this chapter was all about Viviana, This was about her upbringing. We got to see Val's last week. This week we give Viviana's upbringing. Different in a lot of ways, the same in a lot of ways. Both fathers cops, both from neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago. It was a short but necessary chapter. We got Val's story, so we need Viv's story. In contrast to Val crossing borders with illegal substances and committing crimes back and forth, Viv wasn't with it. And as far as she could tell, she couldn't see drugs being prevalent in her neighborhood as she was growing up either. What she did see that was prevalent was gangbanging. And what she did condemn and hate was gangbanging. If you're looking to purchase Cartel Wives in any of its forms, there's an Amazon link in the description. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, please do. Hit the like button and notification bell so that we can keep this channel moving forward. Peace.